Hello and welcome everyone to the Polity Primer series of Drishti IAS. My name is Pragya and today we are going to discuss a very important topic that forms the foundation of any democracy. The title of our today's discussion is Comparative Analysis of Freedom of Speech and Expression. In this discussion, we will be studying about the meaning of this term, freedom of speech and expression. We are also going to analyze the freedom given to the press. We are also going to draw a distinction between the US Constitution provisions and Indian Constitution provisions regarding the freedom of speech and expression. We are also going to analyze what are the key issues, and in the end we are going to see a practice question for your prelims examination and a practice question for your mains examination. Now let us proceed to understand the background of our today's topic. So as per a recent study that has been made by Reporters Without Borders, it has been found out that many Southeast Asian countries are prioritizing national harmony over freedom of speech and expression, and this is indeed a worrisome trend. You know, the freedom of speech and expression and the freedom given to press is being curtailed throughout the world, and this is why this is a worrisome trend that countries are using this defense of national harmony to curtail the freedom of speech and expression as well as the freedom of press. Now let us understand what do we mean by this term freedom of speech and expression. So if in simple terms, if I talk about my freedom of speech and expression, so supposedly I am teaching you all here, okay, and I have spoken something that, okay, this is not true, this is not right, the government should do this, the government should do that, the government should not, place a blanket ban on internet. So all of this I am teaching, and while teaching you, I am expressing my freedom of speech and expression. I am expressing my opinion. So what happens in a democracy is the police cannot come in the evening and say that, okay, you have spoken against my government, now I'm going to arrest you. No, this does not happen in any civilized democracy. Why? Because freedom of speech and expression forms the bulwark of any democracy in the world. So the term is bulwark. And the foundational basis of every democracy is the freedom of speech and expression that is given to the citizens. And these includes the freedom to express their opinion through any medium, be it social media, be it newspapers, and be it any other medium such as, news which is aired on the TV. So we are using these mediums to express ourselves freely. We are using this medium to positively criticize the government. We are using these mediums to freely express our dissent, and these all forms a part of the freedom of speech and expression that is given to us, and this is very important for the effective functioning of any democracy. So in every democracy, the foundational value or the foundational aspect on which the constitution is built also includes the freedom of speech and expression, and it takes within its ambit the opinion of the citizen, the free expression of opinion by the citizens and free articulation of the opinion of the citizens, that the citizens are empowered to articulate also, and without any fear of reprimand or arrest or repression by the government, they are able to express their opinion freely. So in short, this is the meaning of the freedom of speech and expression. And if I talk about this being a human right, it is declared as a human right under Article 19 of the UDHR. So this Universal Declaration of Human Rights under Article 19 recognizes this right of freedom of speech and expression as a human right. And if I talk about its constitutional history, that from where do we started recognizing this freedom of speech and expression? So the English Constitution, or famously known as Bill of Rights, recognized the freedom of speech and expression long back in 1689. In 1689. After this also, when the Declaration of Man and Rights came into force after the French Revolution, this also recognized the freedom of speech and expression as a very important right that is given to the citizens of any country or given to the man. And if I talk about the constitutional provisions given in the Indian Constitution, Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A guarantees to us the freedom of speech and expression. So Article 19 guarantees us 6 freedoms. And one of these is freedom of speech and expression. So this Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A states that all citizens, the word here is citizens, kindly note that, shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. And the genesis of this right, or the philosophy of this right, is borrowed from the preamble to the Constitution, which talks about solemnal resolve to secure to all of its citizens liberty of thought and expression. So the genesis of this right belongs to our constitutional preamble, and preamble, as we know, is the opening gate of our Constitution, and it guarantees to us the liberty of thought, the liberty of expression of our opinion, and this forms the foundational basis of this right given to us in under Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A of the Indian Constitution. The exercise of this right is, however, is subject to reasonable restrictions. What do we mean by this? If you ask me that, ma'am, what is this statement saying? So this statement is saying that, or it is implying that this right is not absolute. You cannot, speak something that is very derogatory or seditious against India or is blasphemous in nature and you can get away with it. No, this right is not absolute in nature. It is subject to the reasonable restrictions which are laid down under Article 19 Clause 2 of our Indian Constitution. And this speaks about the reasonable restrictions which the government can impose on this right of freedom of speech and expression that is given to us. Now let us study about the freedom of press, because any discussion on freedom of speech and expression cannot be completed without the freedom of press. Why? Because media is the fourth pillar of our Constitution. It is recognized as the fourth pillar of our Constitution. In any democracy, there has to be a freedom of press, because without freedom of press, how will you come to know about the information that is being spread? And to know about all of the information or all of the current happenings which is going on in the country, we need freedom of press, and freedom of press is also recognized as a important part of freedom of speech and expression. So if I talk about the Indian Constitution, this is not mentioned explicitly. That is, the freedom of press is implied from the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by the Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A. So the Supreme Court in its catena of judgments has interpreted freedom of press under freedom of speech and expression. And this interpretation, the Supreme Court has laid emphasis in several cases on the importance of maintaining freedom of press in a democratic society. So any democratic society requires freedom of press. Why? To receive correct information, to form our opinion, to express our opinion. What happens is, many of the important persons write their columns in the newspaper. They come on the national television and debate about various pros and cons of various important government policies or various national happenings that are happening in the country, various current issues. So for all of this to happen, we need to have a freedom of press. And in India, we do ensure freedom of press, and it is interpreted under Article 19 Clause 1 Clause A itself under the wide terminology of freedom of speech and expression. So if I talk about the comparative analysis of the provisions of US Constitution and the Indian Constitution in this regard, in US Constitution, the freedom of press is expressly mentioned. So this is the distinguishing factor between the Indian Constitution and the US Constitution. as I was explaining this before also, that Indian Constitution does not mention this term freedom of press explicitly. It is interpreted as a part of freedom of speech guaranteed to us by Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. And if I talk about USA, no restrictions are mentioned on the freedom of speech and expression. These restrictions are interpreted by the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, from case to case basis. But in our case, we have mentioned specific restrictions on this freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 2 of our Indian Constitution. So this was all about a comparative analysis of freedom of speech and expression from the provisions of US Constitution as well as in the between the Indian Constitution. Now let us study about the key issues which we face in the freedom of speech and expression. So the first issue is the issue of hate speeches. This is a very important phenomenon that is going on in our country since a long time. People think that this is an absolute right. People think that this right is sacrosanct. We can use our freedom of speech and expression. They forget about the reasonable restrictions. So what they do, they start giving hate speeches. One community is speaking on against another community. So this is all very common, and sometimes it can also lead to riots. So hate speeches, or another species is the fake news. So after the boom of social media in India, fake news is spreading like fire. One WhatsApp forward to another WhatsApp forward. So this is how fake news is also, a challenging aspect of, or a con of, the boom of social media in India. And we do not recognize that, no, this right is not absolute. You just cannot say whatever you want to say. Sometimes you need to put a filter on, right, before speaking. And this, people forget it, and then when they are arrested, they ask that what have we done wrong. You cannot just keep on spreading hate, keep on spreading fake news, because the government has taken a serious stance on the happenings of lynching due to fake news, and the government has made a serious attempt to stop all of this. So now they have also a fact finder committee to help the to help the misspread of fake news, and to help the people recognize what to believe and what not to believe. The second issue is misinformation. People need to understand that spreading information does not mean you can spread misinformation as well. Just because you have a freedom of speech and expression doesn't mean you will keep on misinforming people about all of this. Especially happened during the COVID vaccine time. We were misinformed that, okay, if you'll take this COVID vaccine, you will suffer from all of the side effects, you will get heart attack and you will die. No, this was not going to happen. So we saw the boom of misinformation during the COVID era, COVID pandemic times, when there were a series of misinformation were going on around the social media regarding the use of COVID drugs, side effects of COVID vaccine, etc. So people need to be cognizant of this fact that just because you have a freedom of speech and expression doesn't mean you will keep on spreading misinformation. Then trying to limit freedom of press. This is again a common issue which we face, that freedom of press is generally curtailed by the governments in the garb of maintaining national harmony. And this also takes place in the forms of internet bans. Recently we have also seen that a new news anchor report has been released by our opposition parties, that okay, these are the news anchors we are not going to follow, who are not spreading correct information. And often we also see that the journalists are being arrested. So what is all this? This is curtailment of freedom of press. So this should not happen in any democracy. The foundational aspect of any democracy is also the freedom of press. Then there are internet bans. As I was explaining this before, also the government uses this internet bans as a blanket ban. Whenever they find that, okay, there is a communal disharmony that is going to arise or has already arisen, they ban the internet. Especially we saw that in the case of Jammu and Kashmir. Until and unless in Anuradha Bhasin case, the Honorable Supreme Court intervened, and guaranteed right to internet as a fundamental right. The government used to ban internet like anything. Whenever they find that okay, this issue is going to flare up, they impose the internet ban, and this is very frequent. Then there is censorship. Censorship and restrictions are existing from ancient times, but this has become very frequent now. You censor anything which you find labeled as seditious. You use the restrictions under Article 19 Clause 2. You use any positive criticism, you censor it as defamation. So all of this is also happening, and which in turn hampers the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression that is given to us. So these were all of the key issues that we face while dealing with the freedom of speech and expression. Now let us discuss how the Southeast Asian countries are flaring up in the World Press Freedom Index. So this World Press Freedom Index is an annual ranking of countries compiled and published by the Reporters Without Borders since 2002. It basically analyzes the countries and assesses that which country is more supportive towards freedom of press or freedom of speech and expression. If I talk about the India's rank in 2023, India's rank was 161. This indicates a very poor performance, that India is lacking, in the World Press Freedom Index, that the press is not exactly free in India. We impose a lot of censorship on press. And if we talk about the trend in the Southeast Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries have also flared up very low in the index. If I talk about Vietnam, Vietnam was ranked third worst in the world after China and North Korea. Just imagine, Vietnam is a Southeast Asian country. And that is why this organization, Reporters Without Borders, has released a report stating that Southeast Asian countries prioritize their national harmony over the freedom of speech and expression of its citizen, and which is a worrying trend which we are observing throughout the globe. Now, if I talk about this index, most of the Southeast Asian countries have flared up very low, apart from Malaysia, which is ranked as 73rd in the 2023 edition of the World Press Freedom Index. So this is a worrying trend which we are observing, that the governments are, limiting the freedom of speech and expression, limiting the freedom of press so as to maintain national harmony, which should not be done. So with this, we come to a conclusion of our today's discussion. We have seen what is freedom of speech and expression. We have also analyzed the Indian constitutional provisions in this regard. We have also studied about the freedom of press. We have also drawn a comparative analysis between the provisions of US Constitution and the Indian Constitution. And we have also seen what are the key issues. Why are we flaring so low in the World Press Freedom Index? And if you talk about the way forward can be the governments need to, value the freedom of speech and expression of the people, and this law on sedition and law on positive criticism being framed as defamation, all of this, there should be a checks and balances on all of these practices so as to maintain the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed to the citizens in any democracy. Now let us analyze a practice question for your prelims examination. So your question is, consider the following statements. Your statement number 1 is, freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental right in India. Your statement number 2 is, freedom of speech and expression is borrowed from the US Constitution. And your statement number 3 is, Article 19 of the Indian Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and expression to the Indian citizens. Which of the following statements given above are correct? Your options are, option A is 1 only, option B is 1 and 2 only, option C is 1 and 3 only, and option D is 1, 2 and 3. Kindly drop your answers in the comment box below. Now let us see a practice question for your mains examination. So your question is, what do you understand by the concept freedom of speech and expression? Is it absolute in India? Comment. So in introduction, you will write about the concept of freedom of speech and expression. You will also mention the constitutional provisions of India. You will also draw a parallel, or you will also compare it with the provisions of US Constitution, as I have done in my lecture today. then you will write that no, this freedom is not absolute in India. It is subject to reasonable restrictions guaranteed under or mentioned under Article 19, Clause 2 of our Indian Constitution. Then you will also analyze some of the key issues such as fake news, hate speeches, internet bans, etc. And then you can conclude, for any democracy to function properly, we need freedom of speech and expression. We also need a free press to report maximum, report the reality of the national happenings that is going on in the country. So you can conclude that this is one of the most important rights given to any citizen in a democratic civilization. I hope this session was insightful for you. If you have any feedback regarding this session, kindly drop it in the comment box below. If you liked today's discussion and found out our today's video to be helpful, kindly like the video and subscribe to our channel for more such updates. Thank you.